The air had carried a strange stillness all afternoon, the kind that makes your skin prickle and the sky bruise into unnatural shades of green. When the sirens wailed through our Kansas town, I had only minutes to dive into the basement. I clutched a flashlight in one hand and my phone in the other as the roar of the tornado bore down. The walls rattled, dust sifted from the ceiling, and somewhere above me, glass shattered like brittle ice. I crouched against the concrete wall, heart hammering in rhythm with the wind's fury. Every object in my life, the photo albums, the furniture, the little ceramic angel from my grandmother was being torn away piece by piece. In the chaos, a sharp buzz from my phone jolted me. For a second, I thought it was an emergency alert, some scrap of information that might tell me how long this hell would last. But it wasn't. The screen glowed with a single line from Cormac Dreyer, the man who had been my boss for nearly a decade. "You're fired. We don't need weak employees." The words cut deeper than the storm's howl. I blinked, thinking maybe the stress and fear had twisted the letters. But when I scrolled, the truth hit harder than any flying debris. Attached below was a forwarded email, clearly sent by mistake. In it, Cormac bragged to the CFO. "Finally got rid of her now. The embezzlement plan won't be challenged." I read it twice, then a third time, the blood draining from my face. Outside, the storm shredded my world. Inside, betrayal hollowed me out. My house might collapse, but the foundation of my loyalty had already crumbled. The walls shuddered, a beam cracked above me, but all I could see was the message. Years of loyalty, late nights, and millions in revenue I'd secured meant nothing to him. To Cormac, I wasn't an asset, I was an obstacle to his corruption. The flashlight flickered, the storm's roar began to fade, and silence crept back into the basement. I was left surrounded by dust and rubble, holding a phone that had just rewritten the course of my life. And as I climbed the steps into the ruins of my home, I knew the storm outside had ended, but a new one had only begun within me. The morning after the storm, the sun rose on a landscape that looked unrecognizable. My street had turned into a graveyard of splintered beams, overturned cars, and roofs peeled back like tin can lids. Where my home once stood was a hollow frame and a yard littered with fragments of my life. I stepped carefully through the debris, crunching glass under my shoes, each shard glinting like a cruel reminder. I found the photo of my parents' wedding. The frame bent and the glass cracked across their smiling faces. A quilt my grandmother had sewn lay tangled with insulation, soaked by the rain. Every object I picked up carried weight years of memory, reduced to scraps scattered in the dirt. But heavier than all of it was the message still burning in my mind. Cormac's words had branded themselves into me weak, fired, disposable. I thought of the years I'd given him. Boarding red-eye flights when I was too exhausted to stand, skipping Mateo's birthday dinners, canceling Christmas trips because a client demanded a last-minute call. I remembered sitting in sterile conference rooms until midnight, defending accounts from competitors who circled like sharks. My sacrifices had kept Dreyer Analytics afloat more times than Cormac would ever admit. Mateo wrapped his arm around my shoulders as I stood in the ruins. Silent. He didn't speak right away, and that quiet felt more comforting than anything. When he finally did, his voice was steady. "Maybe this is the start of something different. Isolde. Maybe losing the house and the job means you're free to rebuild on your own terms." I wanted to believe him, but all I could feel was the sharp edge of betrayal. Loyalty had been my compass, guiding every choice I made, and Cormac had turned it into a weapon against me. Standing there, I realized the storm hadn't just destroyed wood and brick. It had torn apart the illusion that devotion meant security. As I let the broken quilt slip from my hands, the thought settled deep if loyalty meant nothing to Cormac. Then I had no reason left to keep playing by his rules. The rental apartment smelled faintly of paint and dust, a place too new to feel like home, yet too temporary to offer comfort. I set up my laptop on the small kitchen table, determined to reach out to the clients I had nurtured for years. They had known me as reliable, steady, the one who would answer the phone at midnight if a crisis struck. Surely, I thought, they would offer at least a word of support after what I had endured. The first call went to voicemail. The second connected, but the tone on the other end was clipped, formal, as if I were a stranger. I tried to explain, but the client cut me off, saying they had been told I was under investigation. My stomach dropped. By the third call, the truth became impossible to ignore. A longtime client, one who had once trusted me with every expansion plan, sounded unsettled. He asked in a low voice if it was true that I had been caught manipulating invoices for personal gain. Before I could even respond, the line went dead. He had hung up on me. I sat frozen, the silence in the apartment pressing against my ears. Cormac hadn't just fired me, he had poisoned the ground I'd spent a decade cultivating. The thought of him smugly feeding lies to the very people whose loyalty I had fought to earn sent a heat through me that was hotter than rage. My name, my credibility, my future, he was stripping it all away with whispers. Mateo found me at the table, hands clenched, eyes burning. He listened as I told him what had been said, each word tasting like ash in my mouth. When I finished, he leaned against the counter and spoke with calm certainty. If you want to clear your name, you'll need proof. Rumors only stick until someone shows the truth. His words cut through the fog of anger, giving me the faintest outline of a path forward. And as I stared at the dead phone screen, I knew I would need more than anger. I would need evidence. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly above the windows, casting a tired pink glow across the empty booths. It was close to midnight, and the only sounds were the clink of dishes behind the counter and the occasional shuffle of the night cook. I slid into a booth near the back, my coat still damp from the drizzle outside. A few minutes later, Noelia Duarte appeared, her hood pulled low, eyes darting like she expected someone to be following her. She sat opposite me without a word, her hands wrapped tightly around a coffee cup she hadn't yet ordered. Finally, she whispered, "I don't have long. If anyone from Dryer knows I'm here." Her voice trailed off, but the tremor in it told me enough. From inside her bag, she pulled a worn envelope and slid it across the table. My hand hovered over it, reluctant to touch what felt like a live wire. When I opened it, my breath caught. Copies of falsified invoices, manipulated expense reports, and backdated statements all signed off under Cormac's watch. "He's been hiding debt for months," Noelia said, her voice steadier now that the evidence was out of her hands. "But that's not the worst of it. He used your firing as a smokescreen. While the board was distracted with gossip about you, he buried half of this paperwork. You weren't let go because you were weak. Isolde, you were the only one who would have noticed." Her words landed harder than any rumor. I hadn't been discarded out of contempt. I'd been eliminated because I stood in his way. The betrayal cut deeper, knowing that my downfall was planned to protect his fraud. I folded the papers back into the envelope, my hands trembling not from fear but from clarity. For weeks, I had felt powerless, defined by the storm and Cormac's lies. Now, in this dim booth, I realized I was holding something stronger than anger. I was holding proof. As Noelia slipped out into the rainy night, I gripped the envelope to my chest, knowing that my fight against Cormac had only just begun. Sabina Ortega's office overlooked the river, its windows tall and immaculate, the kind of place that radiated precision. She greeted me with a brisk handshake, her eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. I laid the envelope from Noelia on her desk, and she studied the papers with the calm detachment of someone used to handling fire. "These are dangerous documents," she said finally, tapping the forgeries with a lacquered nail. "They show fraud, but they also make you a target. If Cormac suspects you have them, he'll come at you with everything." I had expected that. What I hadn't expected was her request for all of my old client contracts. She spread them across her desk, flipping page after page with quick, practiced movements. Her brow furrowed, then lifted, as though she'd found something glittering in a pile of dust. "Here," she said, turning the papers toward me, a section highlighted in bold key person provision. I leaned closer, reading the language. If the named strategist me was removed from the account, the client could terminate the contract without penalty. Sabina sat back, folding her hands. "You were the anchor, Isolde. Not Dryer Analytics. If you're gone, the clients have every right to walk." The realization hit like a jolt. All this time, I had felt stripped of power, a cast-off with nothing left. But this clause changed everything. The loyalty I'd built, the trust I'd earned it was written into the contracts, legal and undeniable. "This is worth millions," Sabina continued. "It's leverage. With these provisions, you can move clients away from Dryer legally, but tread carefully. One misstep and Cormac will sue you into the ground. You'll need strategy, not just rage." I pressed my palms flat on her desk, steadying myself. The tornado had taken my house, and Cormac had tried to take my name, but sitting here, with Sabina's discovery glowing like a hidden weapon, I felt the ground shift. For the first time, I wasn't the one at risk. I was the one holding the knife by the handle. Leandro Voss's office in Manhattan looked more like a private gallery than a workplace. White walls, abstract art, and not a single piece of clutter. He stood by the window as I entered, tall, composed, the city lights reflected in the glass behind him. "I read your message," he said without turning. "But tell me why I should waste time on a woman who's lost her job, her house, and if the rumors are true, her reputation." The words stung, though I had braced for them. I took the seat across from his desk, steadying my voice. "Because those rumors were planted by a man who's about to drag his company into ruin." He finally faced me, his expression unreadable. "Bold claim, but bold isn't enough in this business. Show me why I should believe you." I slid the envelope across the sleek desk, the same one Noelia had given me in that diner, its edges softened by my constant handling. Leandro leafed through the contents in silence, his eyes narrowing as he reached the falsified invoices and forged signatures. When he looked up, the faintest smile touched his mouth. "So Dryer Analytics is rotting from the inside." He tapped the papers once. "And you were the inconvenient obstacle he needed gone." I nodded, a pulse of heat running through me. "I know the clients, Leandro. Their trust isn't in Dryer, it's in me. With the key person clauses, they can walk, but I need backing to build something they can walk toward." He closed the folder carefully, as if sealing a pact. "I'll finance you, but understand this, my money follows results. Bring me at least 3 major accounts, and the rest will fall in line. Fail, and you'll sink with him." I leaned forward, the fire inside me burning steadier than it had in weeks. "Then I'll bring them. Every single client who knows my word is worth more than Cormac's empire of lies." Leandro extended his hand, sharp and deliberate. I clasped it, sealing not just a deal, but a vow. The fight had begun, and I intended to win. The boardroom at Dryer Analytics was as cold and sterile as I remembered, a wall of glass framing the Chicago skyline. Cormac stood at the head of the table, his voice steady, his presentation polished. Charts and graphs glowed on the screen, each one a carefully crafted illusion of stability. The directors nodded uneasily, their pens tapping against notepads, their doubt hidden behind forced professionalism. Then the doors opened, and I stepped inside with Leandro Voss at my side and Sabina Ortega just behind. Every eye turned toward us. Cormac froze mid-sentence, his hand tightening around the clicker. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice echoing off the glass. Leandro set a leather folder on the table with quiet precision. Sabina slid documents across to each director, her tone clipped and confident. A counteroffer. Immediate buyout of Dryer Analytics assets at a price that reflects its current realities. Cormac laughed, too loud, too brittle. You can't be serious. This woman was fired in disgrace. She's nothing. I met his eyes and let the silence stretch until it broke him. Then I spoke. Your clients don't agree. Neither do your numbers. A director shifted uncomfortably. Another leaned forward, scanning the pages. Leandro's offer was bold, a fire sale figure but backed by capital and stability that Dryer no longer had. For a moment, the room wavered, and Cormac sensed it. He slammed his palm on the table. You can't trust her. She's a thief. That was the moment. I drew a single sheet from my folder and slid it across the polished wood, the faxed contract, signed in his own hand, authorizing a deal that didn't exist. The silence after was heavier than the storm that had destroyed my house. One by one, the directors turned on him. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. Questions erupted, votes shifted, and then, with a series of signatures, the company I had built from the ground up yet been cast aside slipped from his grasp and into mine. Cormac's empire had crumbled in the span of a single afternoon, and I watched the realization darken his face like a storm cloud about to break. For a long second, Cormac just stared at the signatures on the documents. His face drained of color. Then the silence cracked. His chair screeched backward as he stood, pointing a trembling finger at me. You think this makes you powerful? He spat. You're nothing but a parasite, disloyal, hysterical, unfit to lead anyone. His voice rose until it rattled in the glass walls. I stayed seated, hands folded, while his words spilled over the table like acid. The directors shifted uneasily, some avoiding his gaze, others narrowing their eyes in quiet disgust. When his tirade failed to break me, he leaned forward, slamming both fists against the polished wood. She's finished, he shouted, veins bulging at his temples. Do you hear me? Finished. The room went still. No one echoed him, no one even nodded. For the first time, Cormac's voice carried no authority, only desperation. Then he lunged across the table, scattering pens and papers. Two directors pushed their chairs back in alarm. Before he could get closer, the heavy doors opened and security strode in, summoned silently by Sabina minutes earlier. Mr. Dryer, one of them said firmly, it's time to leave. He jerked away, thrashing like a man drowning, his shouts echoing as they restrained him. She'll ruin you all, you'll regret this. His tie swung loose, his hair damp with sweat, but no one moved to defend him. Not a single ally remained in the room. The doors shut behind him, muffling the last of his fury. In the quiet that followed, the directors looked at me differently, not with suspicion, but with recognition. For the first time, I felt the ground shift fully beneath my feet. The fear that had shadowed me since the tornado, since that message, was gone. I had survived the storm, and now I had survived Cormac's collapse. What lingered was a new certainty he would not surrender easily, and the wreckage he left behind would not stay buried. The boardroom had emptied hours ago, leaving only the faint hum of the city outside and the weight of signatures that had rewritten my future. I gathered the last of my papers when the door creaked open. Cormac slipped inside, his tie undone, his eyes bloodshot, his posture stripped of the confidence he once wore like armor. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, breathing hard. You think this is victory? His voice was hoarse, raw. You humiliated me in front of my board, dragged my name through the mud, betrayed everything I built. I didn't move, didn't rise to his level. I simply placed my folder on the table and looked at him. You fired me while a tornado destroyed my home. You called me weak, but that storm tore walls, not me. You destroyed yourself. The words hung in the air, sharper than any outburst could have been. His mouth opened, then shut again, his throat working for a retort that never came. For the first time, Cormac Dreyer had no answer. He staggered closer, searching my face for some sign of doubt, some fracture he could press into. But there was nothing left for him to take. The empire he'd controlled was gone, his reputation shattered, his grip on power broken by his own arrogance. He dropped his gaze to the floor, hands trembling at his sides. "They'll regret siding with you," he muttered, though even he seemed unconvinced by the words. Then, without another glance, he slipped out of the room like a shadow retreating from the light. I exhaled slowly, the tension leaving my shoulders in a wave. The fight that had consumed me since the storm was over, and I had stood my ground. Now, for the first time in months, the question wasn't about survival. It was about what I would build with the power he had thrown away. 6 months later, the offices of our rebranded firm overlooked the Chicago River, glass walls reflecting a skyline that now felt less intimidating and more like possibility. The conference floor hummed with the steady rhythm of work teams collaborating, phones buzzing with new contracts, laughter echoing from corners where silence used to rule. My own home had been rebuilt too, not identical to what I had lost, but stronger, anchored with steel beams and windows reinforced to withstand future storms. In both places, the house I returned to at night and the company I guided by day, the air carried the same message: survival was no longer the measure. Growth was. The first policy I enacted as CEO was one Cormac would have scoffed at: a disaster relief fund, written into the budget as non-negotiable. Any employee struck by tragedy would never be abandoned, not on my watch. The board approved it unanimously. The applause that followed was quiet but heartfelt, the kind that signals respect rather than obligation. Clients returned in waves, many citing the same reason: trust. They wanted continuity, honesty, and leadership that didn't crumble under greed. Employees who had once lived under fear began to thrive, their ideas flowing freely, their loyalty visible not in forced smiles but in genuine commitment. Meanwhile, the industry headlines carried a different story about Cormac Dreyer: blacklisted, investigated for fraud, abandoned by his allies. His name appeared less as a competitor and more as a cautionary tale. Each article was a reminder of how quickly arrogance corrodes what it touches. Sitting at my new desk one evening, I thought back to the night in the basement, the roar of the tornado, the glow of that text message. The storm had torn through my walls, but it hadn't destroyed me. What it did was strip away illusions, leaving only what was worth rebuilding. I had sought justice, and I had found it. But more than that, I had found clarity, integrity, and loyalty. When returned in kind, can weather anything, even betrayal, even storms. The tornado destroyed my house, but Cormac destroyed himself. I just made sure everyone saw it.